Welcome to the Demography Today lecture series, and sponsored by the BBA Foundation and by LOMPOP project, European 2020 Horizon 2020 research project. And we are very lucky today to have here Michel Oris. Michel Oris is one of the beneficiaries of our project in Switzerland. And he's a full professor at the School of Social Science at the University of Geneva. He has been the Vice Rector for Research and Human Resources from mid-2015 to mid-2018 at the University of Geneva. And he was previously the Director of the International Interdisciplinary Center for Gerontology and Vulnerability Studies and co-director of the Swiss National Center of Competency in Research Lives Overcoming Vulnerabilities, Life Course Perspectives. He also funded the program of Socioeconomics and Demography in the University of Geneva. He is president of IDEL, the Association, International Association of Demography in French language. Probably I need to say it in French. And his research focus on inequalities with an emphasis on the living and health condition of the elderly, injustice regarding death, and interactions between individual trajectories and the dynamics of social structures between vulnerabilities and life courses. So as usual, it's a great pleasure to have you here at the Institute of Statistics and Cartography of Andalusia, and that you have time to come to talk to us about the Swiss longitudinal study, and so we will listen to your talk. As usual, we have between 45 minutes to 1 hour talk, and then we will open the floor for questions. So welcome.
The context is this incredible success of the human being, which is the expansion of longevity, of life expectancy, which is particularly successful in Switzerland, since just last year the Swiss man exceeded the Japanese man. That is to say, it's one of the highest life expectancy in the world. But the central question for my research team and several other research teams in Switzerland and abroad is what about the inequalities within progress? It's something that we study in demography, but also in gerontological research, where we see that elderly or older adults are in better health, are less often poor, and so on. But what happened with the minority that did not benefit from the progress of the last 30 or 40 years? And to answer this question, we need data. And my focus today, since we are in this institute, is mainly about data collection, data acquisition, critique of data, and I will give a few illustrations about what we can do and who we can run some original analysis with those data, but it will be just a short illustration because I have at the most 60 minutes. By the way, don't be worried about the distinction talk and question. Whenever you have a question, just go and we will deal with it. We are a short number, so we don't need to be very full. So the data. The data, first originality is that it's not done purely by a statistical office, in whose case the Federal Statistical Office of Switzerland, of the Swiss Confederation, which is located in Neuchâtel, and then used by the academic world, by the researcher. In fact, it's a joint project with the Institute of Preventive and Social Medicine of Basel. Basel is famous for is an institute that is very active in the developing world. The headquarters of the INDEF network is in Basel, and the INDEF network, there are people who in Kenya, Bangladesh, and so on, are running a panel observing the population each 6 months or each year with longitudinal data, especially about health, by the way, but also about different demographic behaviors. And also in Bern, in Zurich, in Lausanne, and in Geneva, for some reason, it was not the medical people, but the demographers and the gerontologists from the Interfaculty Center. Anyway, motivation were that, like in many countries, we have no individual longitudinal data to study mortality. We have census, we have civil registration, we can do a lot of things at a macro level, but we didn't have individual longitudinal data. Moreover, this is not politically correct and consequently not written here, but we have a very large populist party in Switzerland with 2 seats, about 7 in the strange Swiss government. I haven't the time to describe that. And those people are diffusing a lot of discourse about Big Brother watching you, about the statistician who are invading your private life and so on. That's quite an issue in the Swiss context, especially in the majority that is German speaking. So most of the data are anonymized. We cannot have access to the given name and the family name. At the end, we face a challenge. Now, in Switzerland, like in Andalusia, 75 to 80% of the deaths happen above the age of 80. So when you look into civil registration, the death register, it's written retired, and when you look into census, it's written retired. So we have no indication about the inequality facing death, while we have a very important debates about changing the social system. We do not really know how many years live longer people from the popular and from the wealthy classes. So we cannot inform the citizen debates. We developed this project named Swiss National Road, which there are 2 methods, the oldest one and the new one from 2010. Let's start with the oldest one. We took all the population of the country at the 1990 census and at the 2000 census, and the first linkage was done between those 2 censuses to identify the survivors. Then we added the births and the immigrants, and here we always remain with the problem. We have a register, in Switzerland, the system is named the control of inhabitants. I believe it's clear. It's a police tool, sorry. And so we have a register of immigration and emigration, but only for foreigners. If you stay out at 70 on the Costa Brava, it's indicated anyway. If you are a Swiss citizen. If you are foreigners, we have information. And then we added and linked the death, of course not to the survivors, so the target population was strongly restricted. It was much more easy to do that way, and we arrived at something like 94–96% of deaths that are linked to the population data. There is a few deterministic linkages where all the variables we use have one match and only one, and it's done. It has to be the same person. But in most of the cases, we use the probabilistic method. Do I need to explain the probabilistic method? Don't worry. Okay, you see what I mean. Then, like in many countries, the public management aid to have the budget of a census each 10 years. They wanted a stable budget, so we cancelled the population census in 2010, what is a real pity, I believe. And now we have large survey each 10 years, and the 2010 population census was not really a census, but was based on the population register in each municipality of the country, with no direct access of the municipal register to the federal statistical office. Okay. So basically, this is what I explained. From 2010, we developed altogether what we call the Swiss National Cohort 2.0. It's very fashion here. And it's because we benefited from the introduction of a unique identification number for each inhabitant of the country. In fact, it's the social security number that I have here. I'm not Swiss, by the way, I'm an immigrant, but we all have this marvelous number, and it's used to link all the administrative database to some limits. For example, although it's the social security number, we are totally forbidden to access to the social security data. What is to some extent a pity, because almost all health problems are there because people receive some help in the case of hospitalization or things like that. But so, as you can see, the SNC is not allowed to get the social security number. We use a pseudo ID which is based on this number, but cannot be traced back. It's always this ID. You must protect the privacy of the individuals. It should be impossible to go back to a real identification of the person. Well, honestly, it's stupid. Because I mean, I have the exact date of death and the exact date of birth of a person who is dead in this village of the mountain areas. I open the local newspaper and I find his name or her name. Quite abusive. And at the time, I can tell the cause of death of this person, what is awful, I believe, from an ethical point of view. So, at the end, we have a protocol with the people using the SNC where they engage themselves, and they can have a legal penalty if they violate the rules of data protection. But you cannot do really better when you cover all the population of a country. So, to some extent, it's much better than before 2010.
Sorry,
Sure.
a question. The Swiss National Court is ensemble or is all the people of Swiss?
It's all the people living in Switzerland, whatever they are, Swiss or foreigners. So, those data are used for research, and we each time need a critical evaluation. So in fact, it's not the first time that we collaborate together. As you can see from the names that are on the top of this slide, Matthias Lersch, who is from Geneva, who was in Geneva, now he's in the Max Planck. Adrian Spöri from Bern, Lithuanian colleague, and Francisco Di Siena, who is here with Diego. They looked at which point the socio-economic gradient can be assessed in a reliable way with those linked data, with SNC1, before the introduction of the unique identification number. And you have several situations, different situations, like in Andalusia, where now you have each year a census of 10% of the population. Us, we have this municipal population register, Probably the best is the Finnish register. It is the Finnish register because who can you study inequalities in old age when everybody is retired? The best data, the best variable is the level of education. The level of education is an excellent predictor of your socioeconomic status. To tell it simply, in Switzerland, the level of education you achieve at 50 or 60 years before in your life course, at the beginning of your life, predict the level of poverty in old age in a range from 1 to 4. So it's really a good, human capital is a very good indicator if you want to study social inequality in old age. But you need to find this indication in the census. Or in the Finnish case, they have a register of education which has an access to all the school diploma, all the university diploma. So I don't need to ask you, Francisco, what is your highest level of education, your highest diploma. No, it's already in the database. Big Brother did that for you. In the census, you tend to believe, okay, level of education, it's a reliable information. That's not so clear because often I will ask this indication not to you, but to the reference person of your household. It's not politically correct to say household at anymore, so it's the reference person, and it's not completely sure about what happened.
Really, the information is bad.
Yes, and even if I ask this information personally to you, we have a little problem if you are 92 and you start to have cognitive problem. Because it also happens, of course. So, that's the kind of things we can find. Only 65% of those only a primary level confirmed this response in 2000. So you look at the response about education level in 1990, you link to people with the 2000 census, and normally you have to find the same level of education. Little problem, it's not the case. The information is inconsistent. And in 22% of the case, they answer in 1990, but not in 2000. And it's because of a change in the data collection procedure. In 1990, the census mobilized census agent who came to the lodging, took the census form and checked that it was complete. In 2000, a census agent disappeared. You received, what is it in English, envelope. You received the papers with a stamp to send back to the Federal Statistical Office. It was all done by post. So suddenly the rate of incompleteness of the answer exploded.
Sorry, this is for people over the 60s or for all the population?
Sorry, here we studied only people aged 60 and more to be more or less sure that they cannot gain a better diploma between 1990 and 2000. Because there are also ongoing education and things like that. Above 60, we assume that it does not exist or that it is marginal. And here we say the proportion of people who stayed at the primary level diploma in 1990 and provided no answer, 20%, or said that they had a secondary level, 9% in 2000. So Okay. But what can we do? Because I mean, it can affect the study of mortality by educational level. I mean, it's not trivial, 20 or 9%. And we can assume that it's not randomly distributed among all the social strata. We can suspect that the problem is more frequent in the popular classes. It's not sure, but it's a reasonable assumption. So the first thing that we can do to manage that kind of problems when we have the information in one census and not the other, we can assume, we can use the information that we know and assume that it remained stable. If we are reasonably confident in the quality of the linkage, normally with the probabilistic method, we have a score. That's good to look at a simple cross-tabulation in that case to reduce the margin of uncertainty. Second, when the information about the same individual is not consistent, we of course have another problem that we cannot easily reduce. It becomes something that we have to take into account when we interpret the results. We have to consider this margin of uncertainty that sometimes we can reduce, because here I give you another example of strange patterns in the data. Here we wanted to measure longevity by religion. Because Switzerland has not been invaded since centuries. Catholic and Protestant are supposed to live in peace since centuries. It's not totally true, but it's the national narrative, by the way. And Switzerland has not been especially occupied by Nazi Germany during the Second World War. In Belgium, in the building of the population register, computerized population register, you have some bombs. If Belgium is invaded, the population register explodes. It's an historical consequence. But in Switzerland, no. People declare religion into civil registration, into census, even into tax form. Each year, people are used to declare religion. And here we just used religion into census and religion into death certificate to calculate the mortality table and the life expectancy. And we see that the other Christians that are mainly evangelists, Baptists, the new Protestant affiliation came from the United States during the last decades and have some success. They are the higher, and also the those who say, no, I do not belong to a church, okay, the laik, let's say. Then, almost by chance, something strange, we look at the data. And here are the people, I mean, we are reasonably sure that they are the same people in the death register and in the census, but they changed religion. I mean, in the census of 2000, they had this affiliation, and in the death register, they have another religious affiliation. They changed religion. Is it possible? By the way, it's possible because we have some American studies that show that when people reach the end of their life, accumulate health problem, realize that they will die quite soon, they can move back to religion. It's a very funny statistical story. because if you take that into account, religion is a cause of death. I mean, when you take cross-sectional data, you believe that religion pushed to death. If you look with longitudinal data, you understand that it's a different process. To give a class to students in statistics, it's a perfect example of the difference between cross-sectional and longitudinal perspective. But anyway, what happened here, to some extent, is the process I just described. It can be. It's also that in each municipality, the civil servants do not understand this story of Baptist, Evangelical. Okay, you are Protestant, but obviously it happens quite a lot. And another element that, another process is that in the census, or you or the reference person of your household give an indication about your religious affiliation. We know that elderly households are more literal because children are old, many women are widows, so it could be more reliable that what happened at death, so that person is not going to the civil registration telling I'm dead and I was Catholic or Protestant. This is of course a survivor, a kin or a caregiver that is going to the civil registration and is declaring the religious affiliation. And obviously, some of the children of those poor people want to have a religious ceremony for the dead father or mother and to declare a religion, while those people themselves declare themselves as non-religious. So you have a mix of those processes that really can affect the denominator of your mortality rates. At the end, here we made a decision. We decided that the information in the census was not completely reliable, the more reliable than the one in the death certificate. And we corrected, that's what I explained, and here you have the corrected life expectancy. And you see that for the without confession, the impact is quite a lot. While for the other Christian, the impact also exists, but to a lower extent. So without correction, it makes quite a difference in the estimation of longevity by religious affiliation. That's another illustration of the kind of problems we can face. Now, I don't want to organize a statistical and scientific depression among all of you. At the end, even before the social security number, those data have a terrific potential. And just to give you one illustration among several authors, it's the PhD of Jonathan Zuffred. It was published as a book and in some papers. Jonathan looked at the paradox of migrant mortality advantage. Here you have the life expectancy for the man around 2000 and for the woman here by a different part of the world. What is very nice with the Swiss national cohort, since it's exhaustive covering all the Swiss population, is that you have enough number to calculate the life expectancy of the Senegalese immigrant. You can go really into detail. And here you see that it's the life expectancy of the Swiss. All the immigrant subpopulation have a higher life expectancy than the Swiss, but those coming from East Europe, and you maybe know the mortality crisis that happened in East Europe after the fall of the Soviet regime. And for the women, it's almost the same. It's also below the Swiss East Europe as well as Africa and Middle East. But at the rise, all the other one have a better life expectancy. To some extent, for some region like North America, we can understand, but let me say that an Italian or a Spanish immigrant in Switzerland has on average worse living conditions than the Swiss people, lower socioeconomic status, lower income and so on, but they live longer. That's the paradox. There are several explanations about that. The idea of selection at departure, only the most courageous, the most robust, knowing what is waiting for them in the country of destination are leaving, are out migrating, or also to nicely named salmon bias. You fall sick and you prefer to go back in a Spanish hospital with nurse and doctor speaking Spanish and so on. Note that it works for Spain. It will not work for an African immigrant who prefer to stay in a Swiss hospital than in an African hospital. We have to be realistic also. Anyway, there are a lot of debates about this migrant mortality advantage, about two hypotheses, but at the end we need an explanation. And Jonathan,
Sorry.
sure.
On a question about the fallout of the migrant when the migrant of Switzerland.
Yeah.
You can follow with when they live in Spain or
No.
in Italy? No, do you?
No, that would be a dream, by the way. But migrants are better followed in data than Swiss people. If a Swiss citizen is leaving Switzerland, we do not find him in the death register in the next census, and we assume that this person stayed out. But for the foreigners, there is a direct indicator. But of course, that would be great to study the salmon bias to be able to follow the people. Here, Jonathan used a statistical method that is named the decision trees or classification trees. So you start from a node that are Swiss versus foreigners, and you look which variable is the best to explode this initial node. The beginning is very simple. When you are at third, fourth, fifth level, it starts to be complicated. That's everything in statistics, by the way. But here, the main lesson from this graphic is that Jonathan found that the migrant mortality advantage is constructed in the vulnerable situation, bad lodging condition, low socioeconomic status, and so on. Because in those vulnerable situations, the migrants coming from abroad are positively selected among the most robust, most courageous, physical and mental health, while the Swiss citizens who are in this vulnerable situation are negatively selected within the Swiss society. And that's in those nodes that the migrant mortality advantage is considered. And this is a rational explanation to go ahead in understanding of this strange pattern. So there are a lot of original things to do, and here you have a confirmation. Here you have various social status. It's very bad here on the screen. And here are the Swiss, and you see that between the lowest best status and the lowest one, you have a huge range among the Swiss, and you have a weak social gradients among all the types of migrants, that they are still foreigners, that they obtain the Swiss nationality or whatever. The social gradient, the social inequality in mortality is weaker among immigrants than among Swiss natives, because it's coherent that the immigrants are a selected population. Anyway, it was just an illustration. Okay. Here I move to SNC 2.0, where we have the social security number, or anyway, a unique identification number. And we wanted to look at a comparison between life expectancy and healthy life expectancy, with the classical debates: are the years of life we are winning good or bad years, with the hypothesis of mortality compression or mortality expansion or dynamic equilibrium. Here, on one side, we have more recent years where we can use the unique identification number, and moreover, we made something new. We used surveys that are done in public health or in social science on various topics by the scientific community, and we link it to anonymous data to SNC. So here, concretely, we link 71,000 people who contributed to the various wave of the Swiss Health Survey 1992-2012 with the Swiss National Cohort. Because in the Swiss National Cohort, we know the death of the people, but we know nothing about the health. But self-rated health is indicated in the Swiss Health Survey. So taking all the waves together, we reach a relatively large population. You have the data description here for the SNC and for the survey, and keep into account that the rate of participation to the survey decreased. In fact, it makes the analysis of the data more complicated. If the rate of participation is stable across the time, you can establish robust time tendency or trends. But if the rate of participation is decreasing, what is a trend observed across all the Western population? People are more and more reluctant to contribute to surveys. You have a more and more selected population of participants that you can study. So it's important to keep that into account. Also because we know that among the people who refuse to contribute to surveys, there are a disproportionate proportion of people from the lower classes. We often speak about surveys about middle class. The contribution to surveys is not equally distributed. Anyway, we have, again, education. It's a gold mine to study inequality in old age. But, look, unknown level of education, 1%, less than 1%, 1.6 because of what I explained about the 2000 census, 2.8, 2.08, and suddenly here, in 2010-2014, it's almost 16% of unknown. What happened? It happens that from 2010 we have no census anymore. We have only the municipal population register put together in a national database, and in this municipal population register, nobody has to the people the level of education. So for those we could observe in the census of 2000, or old people already in the census of 1990, we know the level of education, more or less. But for those who arrived recently in Switzerland, we don't know. From 2010, we will not have systematic update on the level of education of the people. that's why I'm quite against this cancellation of the population census each 10 years. It will create a lot of trouble internalizes a growing number of trouble. Anyway, here it's an illustration, it's the expansion of life expectancy, of healthy life expectancy, and here are the years in bad health, which are the difference, by the way. We see that in Switzerland we have an illustration of the theory of dynamic equilibrium. Health and life expectancy are very correlated, have a very similar trend. But we were obliged to make some robustness tests because of the growth of unknown information about education in the last years. And here it's another illustration. Do we see, it's always a question, inequalities within progress. What we see is that this parallel progress of life expectancy and life expectancy in good health is working for the people with a high level of education, and more recently for the people with a median level of education, middle level, but it does not work for people with a low level of education. In a gerontological survey that was done in 1979, 66 to about 3 older adults had only the compulsory level of education or no education at all. In 2011, within a similar survey, they remained at 16%, from 66 to 16. But it was the majority of the older adults. It became a minority from a statistical point of view, but also a more and more marginal population from a social point of view. For example, into survey data, you have a social economic gradient of health in 79, and in 2011, it's middle and high class against the lower class, who are much, much more at risk of health problems in old age. So it's what we call a polarization process that we also observe here, and you see that within the impressive progress of life expectancy and even expectancy in good health, there are a growing inequality, a growing marginalization of the people from the lower classes. And that's what we wanted to look at. Okay, I have to go here. You are the Institute of Statistics and Cartography. So to do studies of inequalities within progress, I wanted to show you how we also integrated contextual and environmental data, starting with a complete failure. Like in the preceding example, we linked a large survey we did about the health and living condition of the elderly in Switzerland in 2011-2012 with the Italian-speaking canton of Ticino, the French-speaking canton of Valais and Geneva, the German-speaking canton of Bern, and two Basel City and Basel countryside. And it's a demonstration that we are not in Spain with Andalusia, and I don't speak about Catalonia because I don't want to have a lot of problems, but Switzerland is a confederation. To have access to the data, we had to ask to 26 cantons. And at the end, we asked to 5, representing the diversity of the Swiss society. We have 3,000 participants that we define as cognitively apt to answer themselves, and we had also 500 participants. The answer was given by a proxy, a kin or a caregiver, because the person were not able to answer by themselves. authorized to survey give you two nice picture of the health and living condition of the elderly. And here we wanted to link vivre, leben, vivere. It means life into three main Swiss national language with the SNC. And we had a lot of hypotheses about cognition, I don't show that because all the statistical analysis failed. No effect, nothing robust, because we made the linkage, by the way, and it was costly and it took time and so on. Nothing. And then one of who PhD in the Longpop project, Rose, she talked to use this area-based index of socioeconomic position in Switzerland. Basically, this is something to go beyond the municipal, the classical institutional borders. And as you can see, it's neighborhoods of 50 households with overlapping boundaries using Census 2000 and the root network data with different indicators defining this very local context. And now we even made a step further with what we call moving neighborhood, what means that when I study this anonymous individual, I can have the 50 households that are spatially the closest from his lodging for each individual. And it's 50 households, but I can also define 500 persons, the 500 closest person from the individual. So to analyze contextual effect, it's extremely fruitful. We have only, I have too many fingers in one hand to count the number of studies who did that in the United States, demonstrating that being a blue collar in a mixed time or in an industrial time, it's not the same when you look at the impact on mortality. You have also an interaction between individual and contextual characteristics that can play an important role. And when Rose made this analysis, this SEP has a strong predictive power on general health, on cognition, on well-being, and on depression. So finally, we did not do this job for nothing, and it shows the importance to have not only individual but also contextual data. And it's extremely important in a context. I put this slide to increase the well-being of Diego Ramiro Farinas here in the room. And you well-being also, because this book is coming from a workshop that was organized here. It's my second time in Sydney. The first one was for this workshop. And one of the things that we have seen in this volume, in this workshop and the volume that came from, is that historically speaking, during centuries and centuries, you had urban overmortality. People spoke about urban graveyards. And then in the late 19th, and especially in the interwar, in the early 20th century, we moved to an urban undermortality because of a concentration of educated people, of efficient hospitals, of a sewage system, access to clean water, and so on. All areas where the cities were pioneers. And now it changed. Here you have in 1970 the city center, the suburban area, the peri-urban area with the people taking care to live in the green and so on, 20 people as we can imagine, and the rural area. And you see that for women, it's you have a very clear pattern. For men, it's a bit more, it's a bit less the case, but when you see the evolution about 2000, you see that no, the lowest life expectancy is in the city center. We observe a return of urban overmortality. That's also why we need to have very good contextual data, because the old rules of association are changing now. Then you can find a lot of explanation, but to test this explanation, you need data and you need indicators at the local level. So here there are several explanations. What was interesting for us is that the effect is not the same if you look at the adult mortality, you have few deaths, huh? And at the old age mortality, where you have a lot of deaths, as we know. Among older, we see a differential vulnerability of the elderly through environmental health determinants. It seems to be one of the explanations of the return of urban overmortality. It's a concentration of the elderly population in city center because they cannot drive car. They need to have access to health resources. So you observe out migration in around 70, 75 people are coming back to town. And of course, they change the urban population composition, and it's one of the explanations. But then, it's good from many points of view, but when you have a heat wave, being in the city center is the worst place where you can be. And basically, we made a lot of statistical analysis, defining different kinds of heat waves, taking into account individual characteristics, and then contextual and environmental characteristics. And basically, I will leave you the slides. It's high level for all of you, but my time is over, so I have to conclude. But basically, what we see is that the most vulnerable population to heat wave, the oldest old, are concentrated in the most vulnerable environment. And of course, you can imagine what happened after. By the way, here in the first model, we look only to the impact of various kinds of heat waves on mortality. And when we add the context, the environmental variables, suddenly the impact of most of the heat waves is not statistically significant anymore. So it shows the importance of this environmental dimension. The Bayes information criterion is also improving a lot when you add, so it's quite consistent. And it works for males and for women also. And here it's the beginning of a collaboration since Daria Ordanovic with Francisco Viciano and Diego Ramiro are working on heat waves in Andalusia, especially the Valley of Guadalquivir, which is the warmest region of Europe, as far as I know, where people are extremely bad. They do not die at all during heat wave because it's always warm and they learn not from the cradle who to deal with the warm. And it could be extremely useful to better understand this process, to prevent or to equip of proper resources for people living in areas which will be quite a lot affected by climate change. By the way, it's not a simple issue. For some of my colleagues, the decrease of old age mortality during winter is more than compensating the increase of old age mortality during summer and especially heat waves. So it can be the case. But as a society, we have to protect the frailest of us, whatever. That's not an issue of the number of deaths at the end. It's a moral and social duty to a large extent. So I really hope that we will have a chance to create this European project with Switzerland, Andalusia, Scotland, with the Fog and Edinburgh, and which is the other city? Sweden? Or you had something like that. And also with 2 Swedish colleagues and 9 Belgian colleagues. I have also a nice suggestion. I realized that in the census of 1990, we can take all the people aged at 70, the 1920 birth cohorts, and in fact, those people in 2070 almost disappeared. We remain with less than 2% of the men that are still alive and 4.5% of the women. So for this generation, we can have a complete follow-up of the mortality compression and rectangularization. We can look at the causes of death. We can look at the educational composition of this generation, change it across time, and the impact of differential mortality by level of education, and so on and so on. We can look at who is constricted the gender divide in life expectancy with a perfect Lexis diagram, because we look only at one birth cohort, so the progression of years and of age of life is perfect. It's just perfectly parallel. We could also compare this 1920 birth cohort with those who lived the 1918 influenza epidemics and who were strongly selected. It would be fascinating to compare the Swiss birth cohort who avoided the Second World War with an Andalusian cohort that has to be marked by the Civil War of 36-39. But there are plenty of things we can do with a very simple idea, just looking at one birth cohort. So I stop with this call for collaboration on those crazy but very nice data, and I'm at your disposal to answer any question, of course.